Hi, this is Ed. Thanks for tuning in to our flat sharing module today. We've added a couple of things from the last time that you may have looked at this, so we're just going to sort of take you through from the start again. So first of all, just wanted to ask you what your thoughts were on flat sharing, because some people actually really look forward to it as part of their uni experience. Other people are much more content to be on their own, so not too keen on flat sharing at all. Hopefully by the end of this, you'll have a better idea of how these things work. The good sides of flat sharing, maybe some of the not so good sides of flat sharing as well, and you'll be better prepared to make the right decisions as you go forward. So what are we going to be doing today? We're going to be looking at, first of all, a film called What Can You Afford? And there is an activity tied in with that. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. Then we're going to go on to getting the basics of your flat share in place, the different types of tenancies that you may encounter. What you need to do just before you move in, just to make sure everything's in the right place, what your responsibilities and rights are, coping with different types of flatmates, and then moving out. And then there will be a summary at the end, which is a new film done by Mike, which actually shows his experiences of moving into his new flat. So you'll get it straight from the horse's mouth. So before we start the first activity, I just want to make sure that you've downloaded this particular form, which is the true cost of renting a place. Have that in front of you as you watch the film and fill that in as you go along, and hopefully then you'll get a little bit more out of the film overall.
So you're thinking about renting your own place. There are lots of decisions to make. How close do you want to be to work? Or to your friends? Or to your family? How much space do you need? Are you going to live alone? Or with roommates? Once you have a sense of where you want to live and how you want to live, it's time to start thinking about what renting a place will actually cost you and what you can afford. Now, the two biggest costs you'll have are going to be your monthly expenses and your move-in costs. To start, you want to figure out your monthly expenses, which will help you determine what you can afford to rent. Then we'll take a look at what your move-in expenses might be in another video. So first you'll need to decide what your budget will be. A decent guideline for figuring out what you can afford is something called the 30% rule. Basically, you take 30% of your gross income, that is, your entire income before taxes, and allocate that to your general housing expenses. That's not just the rent. It's also your utilities, insurance, and other costs associated with your home. It is set at 30%, so you can still have some money left over to cover your other expenses, and hopefully even save something while you're at it. Now, everyone's situation is different. For instance, if you have student loans or credit card debt to pay off, you might want to spend less on your housing. Or if you live in a city where rents are higher, you might be able to afford more because you can use public transportation and won't have the typical costs that come with a car. But for this example, let's stick to 30%. So say we're looking at an annual salary of $40,000. In this case, your budget will be 40,000 times 0.3 divided by 12 is 1,000 per month. Now, this doesn't mean you're going to go right out and look at rentals listed at $1,000 a month, or that really nice place you see for $10.50. First, let's think about some other monthly expenses you'll have in addition to your rent. The biggest monthly expenses you're probably going to have are utilities. That's your electric, gas, oil or other fuels, water, and sewer bills. In some cases, the landlord pays for some utilities, but not others. What you're responsible for and what the landlord is responsible for should be spelled out in the lease. Electric bills can vary dramatically. The price of electricity fluctuates throughout the year, or even the time of day. But for this exercise, let's say this averages out to $90 a month over the course of a year. Your fuel bill, typically your gas or oil, can also vary dramatically throughout the year. But for now, we'll estimate it to be about $90 a month as well. And if you have to pay for water, that bill might be around $30 a month. You might also want to think about getting renter's insurance. If there's a fire, a bad leak, or a burglary, rental insurance can cover the cost of your belongings, and it can be as little as $15 a month. Keep in mind, these are all general estimates. Your local utility or insurance company are usually the most accurate source for this information if you want to figure it out yourself. And these are just a few of the basic monthly costs you might encounter with a rental. You might run into extra charges for other amenities as well. And again, depending on the lease agreement, you could even be responsible for additional things, like home repairs. In any case, adding this up gives us a total of $225 for general housing expenses. So, we want to take this and subtract it from the original budget of $1,000, which leaves $775 for rent, which may or may not be enough. If it's too low, one possibility would be splitting your housing expenses with roommates, leaving you more to spend on rent. So you can see there are a variety of expenses you may want to think about in addition to the rent, including the cost of just getting a new place, which we'll cover in another video.
So hopefully, I do appreciate that was obviously an American film, but the general consensus is that really hits the spot. They are guidelines, all the figures that we showed on there, like the 30% rule and the money for electricity and gas and things like that. But the principle is exactly the same. So you decide on your percentage, and maybe 30% may be a little bit small if you're in London. It needs to be perhaps a little bit higher than that. And then you take your other fixed costs into account before you decide on what rent you can afford. But I think that's a really good place to start. So let's move on and think about getting the basics in place first. So what do you need to do before you go into that flat share? Well, first off, really is to decide who you want to live with. You're going to be spending a lot of time with those people. It's a good idea to share with like-minded people. So if you're all party animals, you're probably not going to want to share with somebody that's really, really quiet and wants to go to bed quite early and get up early. Contra, if you're very studious, you like to do a lot of studying at home, you're probably not going to be wanting to live with people that like to play music quite loud and quite late. So no rights and no wrongs. It's just about finding the right type of people that you want to be with. Once you've decided that, you will need to find out who your guarantor is going to be. Now, your guarantor is the person that says that they will pay your rent if for any reason you don't. Now, that might sound quite easy, and you're all thinking, right, well, our folks will probably do that for me. But this is where we have to start thinking about the type of tenancy that we're going to have. If you're a sole tenant, then your folks will doubtless be your guarantor, and that's dead easy and dead straightforward. If you're in a joint tenancy and somebody does not pay their rent, then the responsibility to pay that rent then falls immediately to the rest of the people in that joint tenancy. So if there were 5 of you in the joint tenancy, one person doesn't pay the rent, the other 4 people will have to pick up the cost. Now, that means at the end, there will be one person responsible for all of the costs, and the guarantor sits behind that one person. That's why there has to be just one guarantor for the whole group in a joint tenancy, and that could be a lot more difficult to find and people being willing to actually be the guarantor for a whole group than it will be for a solo. So you might want to give that a little bit of thought. You then need to make sure that you've got enough money in place, first of all, to cover the deposit, which will be about 4 to 5 weeks rent. It won't be more than that. It's not allowed to be more than that now, but a maximum of 5 weeks rent. You will also need to pay your first month's rent up front, and you will need, of course, to stock the flat with essential stuff. So that could be food, it could be cleaning materials, could be all sorts of things. What's guaranteed is, though, that your first month, or even before your first month in the flat, it's going to be a big, heavy outlay month. So just make sure that you've got enough money squirreled away to pay for all of that. And if you haven't, you might need to try and find a little bit of financial support in the short term, just to make sure that you can meet all of those payments on time. Let's have a little talk now about the 2 different types of tenancies that are there. So we've got 2 choices, a single or sole tenancy where there's an arrangement between an individual and the landlord. That is the sole tenancy. Joint tenancy, a group of people with one contract with one landlord. Now, there are pros and cons to both, and it is purely a matter of choice. No one is better than the other. But I just want to give you a couple of little pointers to take into account perhaps when you're looking into this. But please do a little bit more studying by Googling the differences between sole tenancy and joint tenancy, and you'll get a much better idea of it before you make your mind up. So, for example, if you decide to go for a sole tenancy, then a lot of your bills will likely be included in your rent, which means that your rent may be slightly higher than if you are in a joint tenancy. Then you will probably have to pay all of your bills yourselves, but one person or at most two people's names need to go onto those bills. And be very careful with that, because as we explain in our credit rating video, there is a pro and there is a con to having your name on a bill. If the bills are really looked after well, then that's a pro for your credit rating if your name's on the bill. But if something goes wrong, then that's a big negative for your credit rating if your name's on the bill as well. Second, TV license. Now, you may not have a TV, but if you own a laptop and you can use that to get normal terrestrial TV on, which most laptops can now through iPlayer or something like that, then you will need your own TV license if you are a sole tenant. That comes in at about £160 for the year. Now, if you are a joint tenant, so you are part of that joint tenancy agreement, you only need one TV license to cover the entire group. So there's a bit of a pro there towards joint tenancy. Third thing to think about, if you have a problem as a sole tenant, you report that problem to the landlord and it's his responsibility to sort it out. Whereas if you are part of a joint tenancy, you need normally to solve those problems internally. So that needs to be done between the five of you. So that may swing your mind back a little bit towards a sole tenancy agreement, because it's a little bit easier to get problems sorted. Next thing to think about is when you leave as a sole tenancy, you need to give notice period to the landlord, and the landlord is quite entitled to ask for rent to cover that entire notice period, and then you can leave at the end of the notice period. Now, the problem is with student rentals, the notice period is normally quite long. It's normally to the end of term. So if you decide to leave as a sole tenant, that can take you a while to do so. If you're in a joint tenancy, very often landlords will be very happy for you to move out, provided there is somebody else coming in to pick up your portion of the rent. If your flatmates are prepared to cover your portion of the rent, it could again be a lot easier to leave the flat as a joint tenant than as a sole tenant. So that's something to bear in mind as well. If you're a sole tenant, you don't have any control at all over who else is going to be sharing that flat. That is solely down to the landlord. Whereas as a joint tenant, you have quite a bit of control over who else you invite in. But bear in mind that inviting all of your best friends in is a reasonable place to start, but be prepared that not all friends are good flatmates as well. So those are just a few of the things to think about when you're deciding on the type of tenancy that you want. So right, let's look at some of the legal stuff you need to have in place before you move in. So you will be sent by the agent an inventory clerk. So the inventory clerk will be coming round making a list of everything that's in the flat, and you will have to sign off against that list. Now, my suggestion is that you look at that very, very carefully. You may even decide to do your own inventory just to make sure that everything on there is up to date, all the conditions up to date, and you have photos of anything on there that has got any sort of discrepancy at all. Once it's done, the agent, yourselves, and any flatmates, and of course the landlord, will need to sign that. And when you come to give the flat back, everything on that inventory has to be accounted for when you give that flat back. So if there was, I don't know, a 60-inch TV, flat screen TV on the inventory, when you come to leave the flat, there needs to be a 60-inch flat screen TV on the wall against that inventory. So if it wasn't there when you moved in and you signed off for it, I'm afraid you've let yourself down because you will have to then stump up for that 60-inch flat screen TV. So just be really careful that everything on the inventory is there and in good condition when you move in. You will need, as I mentioned earlier on, your deposit. It's about 5 weeks rent, and please check with the agent or with the landlord where that's going to be put, because it should be going, or it even must now be going, into something called the tenancy deposit scheme, which is a government-backed scheme, which means that your deposit is absolutely safe until such times as you move out. So the landlord are not allowed to touch your deposit to pay off any of their own debts. And as soon as you move out, then any monies that the landlord is owed, they can keep back against your deposit. There has to be evidence of the reasons they're keeping that back, and that should be sent to you within 30 days of you moving out. Then finally, you need to sign your contract, your rental agreement. Actually, surprisingly, perhaps it's not a legal requirement that this is signed on paper, but it should include, if it is there, all of those things that you see on the screen, like your name, your group of flatmates as well, landlord, agent, etc., etc. So it just outlines all of your responsibilities and some of your rights on there as well. So while we're on the subject of responsibilities, what are they? Well, first of all, of course, you have to make sure that you pay your rent and your bills on time. Failure to do so means that you could end up having a bit of a fine, but more importantly, your credit score is going to take a hit. So please be really careful to make sure that you meet all your obligations on that. You should look to repair any damages that you've made. So, for example, if you break a coffee cup and it's not part of a matching set, you just need to replace that coffee cup like for like. Pop down to a boot sale, get a 20p coffee cup, put it back into the non-matching set, and you're good to go. Things like bathroom repairs, so if there's a fault on the plumbing or something like that, that is not your responsibility to fix. That's down to the landlord. Please don't be tempted to go out and get that fixed and then try and reclaim the money. You will have all sorts of problems trying to get that money back from the landlord. You must get his permission first in writing before you get any work carried out. And most landlords will prefer to do that themselves, because they will normally have some sort of agent that will work on their behalf that covers all of those sort of things. It might take a little bit longer than you may hope for to get certain repairs done, and depending on the severity of the repair means that there will be a certain amount of leeway that the landlord has to get that fixed. But anything to do with sanitary, so any things with toilets or anything like that, should be done pretty quickly. Anything that's a little bit more superfluous, maybe a cracked window pane, could end up taking a couple of months. So just make sure that you report that as soon as you see it. You do have a responsibility to keep the flat reasonably clean and inhabitable. The landlord can pop around by appointment, so he's got to make an appointment to see you, but he can pop around just to make sure that everything's in good order. Normally a couple of times a year. He may actually say to the agent that he can do that on his behalf as well. But like I say, they can't just pop up unannounced. They can come in, but it has to be done through you and by appointment. Now, you do need to make sure that that flat is kept secure. If the landlord has left you door locks, window locks and an alarm, please get into the habit of putting those alarms on, or the door locks or the window locks. Even if you're in the house, it will keep you safer, but especially when you're out of the house as well, because if you don't and those things have been left for you, it's there to protect the landlord's property. Failure to use the things that he's left you to protect his property means that he potentially could actually come after you for some of the damages, because you've not had the duty of care on his property. So just make sure that you use anything that he's left you to keep the place secure. You are not allowed to sublet. Now that means that if there is a spare room in your house, you can't ask another friend to come along and pay you some rent without my permission, me being the landlord. That's called subletting. It is illegal. If there is that room, then it's my responsibility as the landlord to let that out or not. That as is my wish. You can suggest to me that that could be a good thing to do, that you've got somebody extra there and that may work. But then it's my responsibility to actually make that invitation and, of course, to draw up that contract. So if you have any questions at all, please check first with the letting agent or the landlord. Can be silly little things like putting a picture up on a wall. Some people allow that, other people don't. So if you need to put stuff up on a wall or want to put stuff up on a wall, please make sure that you've got permission to do that before you actually do so. It may actually be in your rental contract, it may not. But as I say, if in doubt, just pick up the phone or email and get that permission in place before you do anything. And when you come to give that flat back, please make sure it goes back in as good a condition as it was when you got it, if not better. So those are your responsibilities. What are your rights? Now, there's quite a lot of these, and I'm not going to go through them all in detail. You need to know the landlord or the agent's contact details, and that should be for 24/7. You should be able to get hold of those. You need 24 hours notice before anyone can come in. Just as I outlined, there needs to be that appointment in place. The condition of the house needs to be good. So all of the things in there must meet safety regulations. So you might find on all the electrical items that's been left in the flat a little green and white sticker called a PAT test sticker. That needs to be renewed every couple of years. It must have a next test by date on there, and that should be within date. It's there for your protection, so please don't ignore it. It just basically means that a qualified electrician has been round and certified that that's safe to use. Equally, all of the soft furnishings in the flat should meet certain conditions of fire retardancy. And again, there should be stickers or little labels on each of the pieces of furniture just to show that they actually meet those conditions. The agent or the landlord can't badger you. They can't keep coming in and checking that certain things have been done. Again, go back to that same old thing. They can come in, but they do need your permission and they do need an appointment. And of course, they are not allowed to threaten you, open your mail, go through your possessions or anything like that at all. Right, so let's think about once you're in place and you're actually living there. You're going to be living there probably with other flatmates. This can be a really fun time. It can be a few problems, a few irritants can be in there. So understand that not everybody's the same. You're all going to be slightly different, but hopefully if you did your homework before you moved in, you know the type of people that you're going to be living with. I think it's a really good idea to have some sort of rota for things like shopping, for cleaning, making sure that the trash is carried out and things like that. All of the things that need to be done just to keep the house going on. If there's a few of you there, then have that rota, set that maybe once every term, and then everyone knows exactly what their responsibilities are for a given week. Know who's going to be making the bill payments, whose name's going to be on those bills. We've already mentioned that as well. There's a pro and a con to that. Are you going to share all of your groceries, or are you going to buy all of your own? Is some of it going to be shared? Is some of it going to be individual? What space in the fridge is there for individuals? All of the bits and pieces. No rights and wrongs. Just make sure everyone understands the rules. Rules as well for parties and guests. Please make sure that you're allowed to have parties in your flat, first of all. That will be something you need to check with the landlord or the agent. And then if people stay over at any point of time, please understand that the other people will expect them to leave and not still be there a couple of days later. It is their space that they're paying for as well. So any guests, I'm sure, will be made welcome, but there will be a time that they need to leave as well. And like I say, have these flat meetings perhaps once every half term. Make sure that rota's drawn up maybe at the beginning of every term to cover the entire term, or the half term, it's up to you. But have those regularly, make them frank and open, and make sure that everyone's talking and putting their point of view across. Okay, hopefully you'll have a good couple of years in your flat, but time will come where you have to start thinking about moving out. So at that point, you need to check your inventory that you signed when you moved in. Make sure that any damages have been repaired. Make sure that everything is cleaned thoroughly. You could hire a company, but it's loads cheaper to do it yourself. And anything that you don't do, expect to be charged multiple times for by the landlord. So if you don't repair that coffee cup your landlord could end up charging you maybe 150 quid for the same coffee cup. I know that sounds ridiculous, but he can actually charge you for time that he takes off of work. He can get a cab to John Lewis. He can buy 4 brand new coffee cups and make a matching set out of it. He can have some lunch while he's out, and he can charge all of that to you, and that will be quite legal. So please make sure you do as much as you possibly can to protect your deposit. Take photos for evidence to make sure that you've done all of that as well. And if there is anything that the landlord wants to deduct from your deposit, you need to make sure that he provides proof of the reason that he's deducting that. And of course, you are perfectly entitled to challenge. Right, we're going to finish this section with a film that Mike took, which shows some real first-hand experiences of him and his wife moving into their new flat.
Hi everyone, it's Mike from Wise Up here. I've made this video because today my wife and I moved into a new apartment, and I thought I'd just kind of talk you through some of the things that we had to do in order to get ready to become new tenants, and what we have to do on the moving day. Today we moved in. We've started bringing our furniture into the apartment. We had an entry clerk who actually did what we call check-in a couple of days beforehand. We're still waiting for that report to come through. What we're doing today is we're looking around for any sort of elements of damage, and we ourselves are taking those pictures, so keeping record of that ourselves, because if there's anything that the clerk misses, when we move out, we can provide the pictures that we've taken, which are dated and show what the place was like when we moved in. So I'll bring you into the bathroom and show you what we're looking for. So it can be something as small as this, so like water stains on here. Now you might ask, well, why are you that bothered about that? Just clean it yourself. The reason we're taking pictures and videos of that is because when we leave, if they say to us, we've left the place in a very stable, we can say, well, hang on, we found it like this. Obviously, my wife would leave the place, but it will prevent them from taking stuff from the deposit. So I'd like to give a little bit of context. The reason we got this was partly because of the previous tenants' agreement that they'd signed with the estate agent. So they'd actually signed a joint tenancy. So what they did was they moved in with some friends. The friends all signed a joint tenancy, and by doing that, that basically means that if one of the friends leaves, the other friends take on the responsibilities, such as bill payments, it could be the rent. Now the issue with the previous tenant was they moved in with their friends, and they had an argument with their friends, and one of their friends moved out. And what started to happen was they were struggling to keep up with that rent. And the issue with that is not just from the estate agent and the landlord getting annoyed, it also affects your credit rating. And their credit rating starts to go downhill because they won't keep those rents and hitting the deadlines for those rents. And in the end, they were asked to leave. So another example I'm going to show you is, so if we go into the bedroom, so great example here. There's damage to the mirror at the bottom again. If you can see that damage just down there. It's important for us to show that and document that, take pictures, date it, so that when it's time for us to leave, which will be in a couple of years' time, we can say, well, there's damage there. Now, with that damage I've just shown you on the mirror, we could actually put that in straight away and say, look, we're not happy with that damage, we would like that to be repaired. If I'm completely honest, it isn't ours. This was left by the previous tenant, and some of the drawers that we've gone through here, we've actually seen that there's stuff here that belongs to the previous tenant. Please make sure when you do leave, you take everything with you, because you can be charged for not removing your stuff. I've known some people who've left coat hangers in wardrobes and they've been charged £50 for that. So please make sure you leave in good time and you're very organised when you do your end of tenancy checkout. So one of the things I've noticed here is when I'm looking at the thermostat, it was sitting here at about 27 degrees. Now, we are on the 10th floor, so we're going to take this right down to around 16. I could probably put it lower than that, considering the fact that we're approaching summer. We'll probably even take that even lower, even switch off. The reason I mention this is because we're so high up, the heat moves up, and therefore you don't really need to have your thermostat so high. It can save a lot of money on your bills. I think the lesson that we're learning from this is you have to look after the property that you're staying in, because if you don't, you could really lose a lot of money from your previous deposit.
So some good information there from Mike on his experiences of moving into his new flat. So we hope you feel a little bit more confident now about that whole process of flat sharing and moving in perhaps for the first time to your own property. If you want to check this out again, obviously do feel free to do so. Use some of the other resources we've got there, and also check out all of the other sessions that we've got on the website. See you next time.